It's all in a busy day's work on the longest branch line railroad left in Missouri, coming up on the main track. A warm and very windy weekend morning in July 2020 finds us up bright and early at Walker, Missouri. We're along the Missouri and Northern Arkansas Railroad waiting for the Clinton Switcher. This local train left the town of Nevada, Missouri just a little while ago, and today will be making its way 50 miles north to the town of Clinton. The train is setting out today on the aptly named Clinton branch with 16 cars. During the busy harvest season, that number can easily swell to twice that number. These rails are what remain of the old Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad main line between Parsons, Kansas and St. Louis, Missouri. As evidenced by all the hopper cars in tow, grain elevators make up most of the traffic along this line these days. Commodities carried on this route consist mostly of outbound grain and inbound oil. This grain elevator in Walker is a railroad customer, but there are no cars to switch out on this day. Grain elevators of all shapes and sizes can be found up and down the line, including this one in the next town up the way, Harwood. This unique tile-covered structure, belonging nowadays to Midwest Fertilizer Company, was served by the Katy years ago, but the loading spur is long gone now. Just shy of Harwood, our train comes to a stop and waits for a brush clearing crew that's occupying the tracks a few miles ahead. That gives us a few minutes to explore what's left of this tiny community, with its mostly abandoned downtown telling the story of better days gone by. After getting the go-ahead from the MNA dispatcher, our train starts to roll and provides a bit of a morning wake-up call for the sleepy town. Next up is Shell City, where the main street is a little more alive. We get a reminder that sometimes perfect shots just don't work out. A lot of the shots in this video are from the same location seen during the 1980s from our book Show-Me Katy and DVD Katy's Country, both available from Main Track Media. We get ahead of the train and set up at Appleton City. This town has painstakingly restored its Katy depot from 1870. That's the year the railroad arrived and the town was founded. This is the oldest surviving MKT depot in Missouri and one of the oldest on the former Katy system. On display is old MKT caboose number 110. It remained in service on the Katy through the Union Pacific merger. It was retired in 1989 and donated by UP to Appleton City. It wasn't long before we spot our train coming into town. It'll be stopping here for a few minutes to pick up 2 hopper cars and drop off one for a local customer. Here we get an up-and-close look at our power for the day. Engine number 3363 is an EMD SD40-2 built in 1974 for the Soo Line Railroad. Today, she's paired up with EMD SD40-2M number 3200 from sister railroad Texas Northeastern. It was built in 1968 for the Pennsylvania Railroad. These are heavy-duty 6-axle locomotives. Missouri-Kansas Tex is only allowed lighter-weight 4-axle units on this line, so the tracks wouldn't take a beating. With so few trains on this route nowadays, there's a lot less wear and tear going on these rails. So the MNA is able to use these bigger engines, and they're working out just fine. After the switching chores are done, it's time to continue on our way. These rails are what remain of the old Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad Sedalia subdivision, which was part of the main line linking Parsons, Kansas with Sedalia, Missouri and St. Louis, Missouri. The Katy became part of the Union Pacific system in 1988. The last through trains ran here in 1989 after UP rerouted the former MKT traffic to other lines. It pruned this route on both ends. The only section that was retained was the 72 miles between Fort Scott, Kansas and Clinton, Missouri. The Missouri and Northern Arkansas Railroad, MNA, took over operations in 1992. Next up, we catch the train at the Highway K crossing in Montrose. The train will be stopping here as well to drop off some empties and pick up loaded hoppers at the grain elevator. The Ag Company is putting the final touches on a massive new storage bin and loading facility for railcars. We get this view of the switching action farther up the line at the 9th Street crossing. Once the work at Montrose is done, it's time to move on. After Montrose, the tracks passed through areas that were once large coal strip mines. They produced a lot of traffic for the Katy, but most of the operations were closed by the 1980s. Much of the area is now farmland, populated by cows, which on this day weren't sure what to make of me or the oncoming train. We captured this scene in 2019. Running long hood forward, SD 40-2M number 2745, still in the colors of its former owner Union Pacific, is the sole motive power on this run. Well, there are a lot of cows and a lot of deer in this part of west central Missouri. Here, a couple of does cross in front of the local as it creeps along in rural Henry County. MNA became part of the Genesee and Wyoming family of short lines in 2012. Missouri and Northern Arkansas's former parent company, Rail America, was not always diligent about repainting locomotives it purchased from other railroads. But MNA's new parent company, Genesee and Wyoming, has been repainting engines into its bold orange and yellow corporate colors. The train slowly slips into the yard limits of Ladue. Here, the crew will be leaving most of the train on the siding, since there is nowhere in Clinton to leave it while the industries are being switched out. Ladue is where a spur leaves the main line and heads out to the Kansas City Power and Light Montrose power plant. Up until recently, long unit coal trains would come up 2 to 3 times a week. With KCP&L closing down the plant in 2018, it looks like the days of the coal runs are long gone, and things are much quieter here on the Clinton branch. The train will continue on to Clinton only with the cars for the industries located in that community. Everything else will wait right here for the train to return. While the switching is going on, the train ties up the Highway T grade crossing for just a few minutes. But with a population of just 28 folks here in Ladue, there's not a lot of traffic to worry about. North of Ladue, we find the Harry S. Truman Reservoir. When this lake was built in the late 1970s, Katy had to construct a brand new 5-mile line on higher ground and out of the way of the lake. The line relocation opened in 1977. It's been a dry summer and the water is low. We caught the following weekend's train crossing the nearly 700-foot-long trestle high above the water. Just on the other side of the lake is the town of Clinton. It's easy to see the track on this segment is in a lot worse shape. You see, the line south of Ladue was always kept in better shape for the coal trains. North of Ladue into Clinton, with just a couple of customers to serve, there's no need to keep things in top shape. And it shows with the rickety rail and train rocking back and forth. When Katy operated these tracks, they were good for 25 miles an hour, and now trains poke along at 10 miles an hour. We're standing near the Allen Street crossing. This shot duplicates the opening scene of an MKT train in our DVD, Katy's Country. First up, the train has to drop off these empty hoppers for loading at the Farmer's Elevator and Supply. This facility had been a long-time MKT customer, but stopped shipping by rail during the UP days of operation. It didn't send out or receive any cars for 25 years until the owners recently started shipping by train again. Our train slowly bounces and bobbles along the old track. It's coming across the Business Highway 13 grade crossing as it comes into an area known as North Clinton. North Clinton is where the Katy crossed the Frisco Railroad's High Line route, which ran between Springfield, Missouri and Kansas City. It was abandoned in 1978 after a large portion was flooded with the creation of Truman Lake. The Katy took over the remaining Frisco trackage in town to serve customers. North Clinton also marks the end of the track for the old MKT in Missouri. The railroad used to continue another 240 miles to St. Louis before operations ended in the 1980s. Beyond this point, the right-of-way is now the Katy Trail State Park hiking and biking path. Our train will use the old Frisco trackage to reach the Champion Brand's oil plant. It's a maneuver with a trick to it, involving the breakup of the two locomotives. Number 3363 backs out of the way onto the Frisco connection. Meanwhile, 3200 takes the loads a little ways down the main. .3363 then comes back to retrieve the loaded tank car. The super short train then backs down the old Frisco line. The conductor has to flag traffic at the Sedalia Avenue grade crossing. These tank cars are headed for the Champion Brands plant. At its 450,000 square foot plant and warehouse, the company produces motor oil and other petroleum products for the automotive industry. It's private property, of course, so we'll rely on Google Maps for this overhead view. You can see the plant at the top of the image. This rendering shows what the Katy-Frisco Junction at North Clinton looked like up until 1978. The Frisco High Line, officially known as the Clinton Subdivision, main line and connection track is seen in red. The MKT Sedalia Subdivision is in green. And this is all that remains today. The old Katy track ends just shy of the location of the former junction. The former Frisco connection track and a short piece of the main line are used to access the Champion plant. After switching its cars, the train makes its way back out of the Champion plant. Meanwhile, we set up downtown near the 1886 Katy Depot. It's now home to the Greater Clinton Area Chamber of Commerce. With number 3200 in the lead now, the train of 4 empty tank cars sets out on the 8-mile trot back to Ladue. All those deer we keep seeing out here? Yet another doe popped into our shot as we were setting things up here south of Ladue. Rounding the curve at milepost 275, which is still designated by an original Katy mile marker sign to our right. The yellow V-shaped sign marks the beginning of the Ladue yard limits. All of the switching duties for the day are done now, so it'll be a non-stop return run back home with 14 cars. Hopefully, all the deer stay out of the way. It's evening time and the sun is starting to set as we catch back up at Rockville, home of the Hyman Incorporated Grain Elevator Complex. You can often find several hopper cars here on the spur for loading, but none of those today. Finally, back to where we started in Walker. The train pokes out of the trees as it creeps into town. Things are pretty much just as quiet as we left them this morning. We intended to follow the train the remaining 7 miles back to Nevada, but we heard on the scanner the crew was about to run out of hours for the day and will be tying down at the next crossing. So we'll leave things here for now. It's the end of a very long day working this remnant of the old Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad. But before we go, how about some more run-bys of that Clinton local that we followed back in May of 2019? We sure hope you enjoyed revisiting Katy's country. Be sure to check us out at themaintrack.com.